Ayanna Blackfeather dropped her morning coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the cabin floor as she stared through her kitchen window. For 6 hours, a massive black bear had been sitting motionless beside a torn military duffel bag, not foraging, not moving, just waiting. This wasn't normal bear behavior. The bag moved from inside, something alive struggling against the canvas, and Ayanna's weathered hands flew to her chest as her heart hammered against her ribs. Her neighbor's dog began howling in the distance, sensing the wrongness that hung in the mountain air like smoke. She thought of Harold, gone 3 years now, who used to say the mountains only sent what you needed most. The bear's dark eyes found hers through the glass, intelligent and pleading, as if it had been waiting specifically for her to wake up. "Lord, help me," she whispered, reaching for her late husband's rifle with trembling fingers. What was in that bag, and why had this bear chosen her cabin? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Ayanna Blackfeather had survived 65 winters in these Appalachian mountains, but none had prepared her for the loneliness that settled in her bones after Harold's passing. 3 years ago, lung cancer had stolen her husband of 42 years, leaving behind only silence and the echo of his laughter in rooms that felt too big for one person. The cabin sat like a forgotten prayer among the towering oaks and maples of West Virginia's remote hills, 2 miles from her nearest neighbor and a world away from the life she'd once known. Harold had inherited the land from his Cherokee grandmother, and together they'd built their sanctuary here, where cell towers couldn't reach, and the only sounds were wind through leaves and the distant call of mourning doves. Every morning, Ayanna set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table out of habit, then remembered with fresh grief that she only needed 1. She'd spent 40 years as a registered nurse at Charleston General, healing broken bodies and mending wounded spirits, but retirement had left her hands empty and her purpose unclear. 40 years helping folks get better, she'd tell Harold's photograph on the mantel. And now these old hands got nobody left to heal. Her daughter Emma had fled to California after the funeral, claiming she needed space to process her grief. But Ayanna knew the truth. Emma couldn't bear to watch her mother navigate widowhood in the same house where her father had died. Their phone calls came less frequently now, stilted conversations about weather and Emma's job at some tech company whose name Ayanna could never remember. The financial reality was starker than her pride wanted to admit. Harold's pension had died with him, leaving Ayanna with Social Security payments of $1,247 each month. The mountain winters were brutal on old bones and older heating systems, and she'd taken to wearing Harold's wool sweaters indoors, breathing in the fading scent of his aftershave that still clung to the fabric. Dr. Martinez had been gentle but firm during her last checkup. "Mrs. Blackfeather, your heart is showing signs of strain. The isolation isn't helping." He'd prescribed pills she couldn't afford and suggested moving closer to town, advice she'd dismissed with a wave of her arthritic hand. This cabin held 40 years of memories. Harold's workshop, where he'd carved wooden toys for grandchildren who never came to visit, the garden where they'd grown tomatoes and dreams together, the front porch where they'd planned to grow old watching sunsets. Most evenings, Ayanna found herself talking to Harold's photograph, updating him on the day's small events. "Saw 3 deer in the back meadow today, honey. Remember how you used to count them for me when my eyes weren't so good?" The silence that followed felt heavier each time, a reminder that some conversations only echoed in one direction now. But this morning was different. This morning, the mountains had sent her something that would change everything, sitting patient as stone beside a mystery that would either break her heart completely or teach it how to beat again. The bear had been there since dawn, and now the morning sun cast long shadows across the clearing as Ayanna watched through her kitchen window. She'd seen black bears before. Harold used to joke that they were the neighborhood's unofficial welcoming committee, but this was different. This bear sat with purpose, like a guardian protecting something precious. The duffel bag beside her was military green, the kind soldiers carried, torn along one seam and stained with what looked like dried blood. Ayana's nursing instincts kicked in as she noted the careful way the bear positioned herself, always between the bag and the forest, scanning the tree line as if expecting danger. By 8 o'clock, Ayana had called the sheriff's office 3 times. The recorded message informed her that Deputy Collins wouldn't be in until 9, and emergency services were handling a multi-car accident on Route 19. She was on her own, just like she'd been for the past 3 years. "Harold, honey," she whispered to his photograph, "what would you do?" She could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. Ayana rose. Sometimes the Lord sends help in packages we don't recognize. The bear's massive head turned toward the cabin, and for a moment their eyes met through the glass. Ayana had looked into thousands of human eyes during her nursing career, eyes filled with pain, hope, fear, gratitude. But she'd never seen such intelligent desperation in an animal's gaze. The bear was asking for something, and somehow Ayana knew she was the only one who could provide it. Against every survival instinct screaming in her head, Ayana opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The bear didn't move, didn't growl, didn't show any sign of aggression. Instead, she made a low, rumbling sound, almost conversational, as if saying, "Finally, you're here." Each step across the gravel felt like crossing into another world. The bear watched her approach, ears forward but relaxed, massive paws spread flat against the earth in a posture that somehow conveyed peace rather than threat. At 20 feet away, Ayana could see the scars on the bear's muzzle, the way her left ear was notched as if caught in a trap years ago. "Easy, Mama," Ayana said softly, using the same tone she'd once used to calm frightened patients. "I'm not going to hurt you or whatever you're protecting." The bag rustled, and Ayana's heart nearly stopped. Something was alive inside, something small and struggling. The bear stepped back deliberately, giving Ayana access while keeping her protective vigil. It was an invitation, an act of trust so profound it brought tears to Ayana's eyes. With trembling fingers, she reached for the bag's torn zipper. The military canvas was thick and durable, but whatever had damaged it had done so with considerable force. As she worked the zipper free, she could hear soft whimpering from inside, the sound any mother recognizes as a child in distress. Inside the bag, wrapped in a blood-stained towel that might once have been white, was a black bear cub no bigger than a house cat. But this wasn't just any cub. Ayana's nursing eyes immediately cataloged the injuries. His right front paw was completely gone, amputated at the wrist with surgical precision. Patches of fur had been burned away, revealing pink scar tissue underneath. Around his tiny neck hung a crude leather collar with a metal tag that caught the sunlight. The cub's eyes opened as Ayana lifted him gently from the bag, and she gasped. His gaze held the same intelligent desperation she'd seen in his mother, but layered with something else. Trauma that ran bone deep, the look of a soul that had seen too much suffering for such a young life. "Oh, sweet baby," Ayana whispered, cradling him against her chest as he weakly nuzzled her neck. "What did they do to you?" The mother bear made that rumbling sound again, and when Ayana looked up, she saw something that would haunt her dreams for weeks to come. The massive bear bowed her great head once, just once, in what could only be described as gratitude. Then she turned and disappeared into the forest with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large. Ayana stood alone in the clearing, holding a wounded cub whose story she didn't know, looking at a metal tag that would soon reveal horrors she couldn't imagine. But in that moment, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest and remembering Harold's words about unexpected blessings, She made a decision that would change everything. "Come on, little one," she said, walking toward the cabin with careful steps. "Let's get you warm and fed. Mama's going to take care of you now." She named him Dakota before she even reached the front door. Friend to everyone in the Dakota language Harold's grandmother had taught them both. Because sometimes, Ayanna thought, the mountains don't just send what you need. Sometimes they send exactly who you need to become. The metal tag around Dakota's neck read, "Property of Mountain Research Facility, Subject 47," in block letters that made Ayanna's stomach turn. She'd spent the morning creating a makeshift bed for the cub near Harold's old recliner, using towels and blankets to fashion a nest where Dakota could rest while she figured out what to do next. The little bear hadn't eaten anything she'd offered, not the honey she'd drizzled on bread, not the berries from her freezer, not even the salmon she'd been saving for Sunday dinner. He just lay curled in the blankets, occasionally lifting his head to look at her with those haunting eyes, before settling back into what looked like a grief too deep for tears. By noon, Ayanna knew she needed answers. The nearest library with internet access was in Beckley, a 40-minute drive down winding mountain roads that made her arthritic hands ache on the steering wheel. But she had to know what Mountain Research Facility meant and what they'd done to this baby. The Beckley Public Library's computer moved slower than molasses, but eventually she found what she was looking for. Mountain Research Facility was listed as a legitimate wildlife rehabilitation center specializing in orphaned and injured bears. Their website showed smiling volunteers bottle-feeding cubs and releasing healthy adults back into the wild. Dr. Marcus Kane, the facility director, had an impressive resume in wildlife biology and conservation. Something didn't add up. Rehabilitation centers didn't amputate healthy limbs or brand animals with subject numbers. They certainly didn't lose track of the bears in their care. "Excuse me, honey," Ayanna asked the young librarian. "Could you help me make a phone call? It's long distance." 20 minutes later, she was speaking to Dr. Kane himself. His voice was smooth, professional, concerned. "Mrs. Blackfeather, I appreciate you calling, but I can assure you we have no missing subjects. All our bears are accounted for. Perhaps you found a wild cub whose mother was killed by poachers. We'd be happy to take him off your hands." The way he said, "take him off your hands," made Ayanna's skin crawl. "Doctor, this cub has been surgically altered. His front paw is gone, and he's got burns all over his body. That don't happen in nature." A pause. "Ma'am, I think you may be misinterpreting what you're seeing. Wild animals suffer many injuries. We'd need to examine the cub ourselves to make any determinations. Can you bring him in tomorrow?" "I think I'll get a second opinion first," Ayanna said, and hung up. The drive home felt longer than usual, her mind racing with questions and a growing sense of dread. When she pulled into her gravel driveway, she could see Dakota through the living room window, still curled in his makeshift bed. But something was wrong. He was shaking, his tiny body convulsing in what looked like a seizure. Ayanna burst through the front door and knelt beside him, her nursing instincts taking over. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his remaining paw hot to the touch. The amputation site, which had looked healed that morning, was now red and swollen with infection. "Oh, baby, no," she whispered, gathering him gently in her arms. "We're going to Dr. Windwalker. She'll know what to do." Dr. Sarah Windwalker ran the only veterinary clinic within 50 miles that treated wildlife. Ayanna had met her years ago when Harold found an injured hawk, and she remembered the young Lakota woman as compassionate but no nonsense. If anyone could help Dakota, it would be Sarah. The emergency visit cost $400, money Ayanna didn't have. She stood at the clinic's reception desk, Harold's gold watch heavy in her palm as she made the hardest decision she'd faced since his funeral. "This was my husband's," she told the receptionist, her voice steady despite the tears. "It's worth at least 600. Will you take it as payment?" Dr. Windwalker emerged from the examination room an hour later, her dark eyes troubled. "Mrs. Blackfeather, can we talk privately?" In her office, surrounded by diplomas and photographs of rescued animals, Dr. Windwalker pulled no punches. "That amputation wasn't done by any veterinarian I know. It's too clean, too precise. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. And those burns—" She shook her head. "I've seen electrical burns before. Someone used shock therapy on this cub." Ayanna felt the room spin. "Shock therapy? He's just a baby." "The scarring patterns suggest repeated exposure. Mrs. Blackfeather, this animal has been tortured systematically for months." Dr. Windwalker leaned forward. "That tag you mentioned, Mountain Research Facility, I've heard rumors about them." "Nothing I can prove, but whispers in the veterinary community about experimental procedures, behavioral modification studies." "You mean they were using him for experiments?" "I can't say for certain without more evidence, but I can tell you this. Whatever they did to him, his mother somehow got him out. Bears don't just abandon their cubs. She risked everything to bring him to you." The weight of that responsibility settled on Ayanna's shoulders like a lead blanket. "What do I do? If I report this—" "They'll take him back," Dr. Windwalker finished. "Legally, he's still their property. Federal regulations are clear about wildlife possession." Ayanna looked through the window at Dakota, now sedated and resting peacefully for the first time since she'd found him. His tiny chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and she could see Harold's face in her memory, hear his voice. "Sometimes doing right ain't the same as doing legal." Ayanna rose. "How long before he's strong enough to travel?" she asked. "Mrs. Blackfeather, I have to advise you—" "How long, Sarah?" Dr. Windwalker studied her for a long moment. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if there are complications. "But Ayanna, you can't hide a bear forever. Someone will find out." Ayanna stood, her decision made. "Then I guess I better make those weeks count." The first week with Dakota tested every ounce of patience and love Ayanna had left in her 65-year-old heart. The cub refused solid food for 3 days, surviving only on the glucose water Dr. Windwalker had prescribed. Ayanna sat beside his makeshift bed for hours, humming Cherokee lullabies Harold's grandmother had taught her, watching for any sign of improvement. On the 4th morning, she woke to find Dakota had moved during the night. Instead of staying in his bed by the fireplace, he'd somehow climbed onto Harold's old recliner and curled up in the exact spot where her husband used to read his morning paper. The sight broke something open in Ayanna's chest, a grief she'd been holding back for 3 years. "You miss someone too, don't you, baby?" she whispered, reaching out to stroke his unburned fur. For the first time since she'd found him, Dakota didn't flinch at her touch. Instead, he made a soft huffing sound and pressed his muzzle against her palm. That afternoon, Dakota finally ate. Just a few berries mashed with honey, but it was progress. Ayanna called Dr. Windwalker with the update and heard the relief in the veterinarian's voice. "You're doing everything right. Keep talking to him. Keep letting him set the pace. Trauma heals differently in wild animals." By the end of the 2nd week, Dakota was following Ayanna around the cabin. His 3-legged gait was awkward but determined, and he'd figured out how to use his remaining front paw and his hind legs to navigate stairs and furniture. What amazed Ayanna most was his intelligence. He learned to open doors by standing on his hind legs and working the handle, and somehow figured out how to use the television remote to turn on the nature documentaries that seemed to calm him. "Harold, you wouldn't believe this little one," Ayanna said to her husband's photograph one evening as Dakota dozed beside her on the couch. He's smarter than most people I know. Yesterday, I found him in your workshop just sitting there looking at your tools like he was trying to understand what they were for. The routine they developed saved them both. Mornings began with Ayana's coffee and Dakota's breakfast of fruits and the special high-protein formula Dr. Windwalker had recommended. Afternoons were for gentle walks around the property, with Dakota staying close to Ayana's side, alert to every sound and movement. Evenings meant sitting on the front porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains while Dakota practiced skills Dr. Windwalker said were crucial for his development. Climbing, balancing, problem-solving with puzzle toys Ayana had bought during her last trip to town. But the financial reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Dakota's special food cost $80 a week. The follow-up veterinary visits were another $200 every time. Ayana had sold Harold's fishing gear, his collection of hand tools, and most of her own jewelry just to keep up with the expenses. She was down to $27 until her next Social Security check, and her own heart medication sat unopened on the kitchen counter because she couldn't afford both pills and bear food. Worth every penny, she told herself when the doubts crept in. But at 2 in the morning, lying awake listening to Dakota's peaceful breathing, she wondered how long she could keep this up. The answer came in the form of Harold's hidden journal, discovered during her 3rd week with Dakota. She'd been looking for Harold's winter coat in their bedroom closet when a shoebox fell from the top shelf, spilling papers and photographs across the floor. Most were pictures she'd seen before: their wedding, family gatherings, Harold's retirement party. But tucked inside a leather-bound notebook were entries she'd never known existed. May 15, 1998. Found Mama Bear in old mine trap near Devil's Creek. Left front paw nearly severed, probably been there for days. Ayana thinks I'm crazy, but I can't leave her to die. Took 2 hours and half my rope, but got her free. She looked at me like she understood I was trying to help. May 22, 1998. Been checking on Mama Bear every day. She's got a den about half-mile up the ridge, and I can see cubs from the binoculars. 3 little ones, healthy and playing. She sees me watching but doesn't charge, almost like she's saying thank you. June 10, 1998. Mama Bear brought her cubs down to the creek today while I was fishing. Just sat there on the opposite bank, letting them play in the shallow water. Felt like she was showing them to me, saying, "Look what you helped save." Ayana would love this, but she'd worry too much if she knew how close I've been getting. The entries continued for months, documenting Harold's secret relationship with the Bear family. But it was the final entry, dated just 3 weeks before his death, that made Ayana's hands shake. January 8, 2021. Doctor says I got maybe 2 months left. Haven't told Ayana the cancer's spread. Don't want her last memories to be watching me waste away. Been thinking about that Mama Bear, wondering if her cubs survived their first winter. If something happens to me, I hope the mountains send Ayana what she needs most. She's gonna be so alone, and she don't deserve that. Trust the mountains. Ayana Rose. They always provide. Ayana sat on their bedroom floor, surrounded by 20-year-old photographs and her husband's secret kindness, finally understanding. The bear who'd brought Dakota to her wasn't just any bear. She was the same one Harold had saved decades ago. Somehow she'd remembered. Somehow she'd known Ayana needed saving too. That night she shared the discovery with Dakota, reading Harold's entries aloud while the cub listened with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "Your mama knew exactly where to bring you, didn't she, baby? She remembered Harold's kindness and trusted us to show you the same love." The 4th week brought new challenges. Mrs. Patterson, Ayana's nearest neighbor, had started asking questions about the unusual sounds coming from the Blackfeather property. Ayana deflected as best she could, but she knew rumors were spreading through their small mountain community. In a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, keeping a secret like Dakota was becoming impossible. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Ayanna suffered what Dr. Martinez would later call a minor cardiac episode. She'd been carrying a bag of Dakota's food from her truck when the chest pain hit, dropping her to her knees in the driveway. The world went gray around the edges, her left arm numb and tingling. Dakota, who'd been exploring the garden, immediately ran to her side, but instead of simply staying close, he did something extraordinary. He ran to Mrs. Patterson's house, standing on his hind legs to scratch at her front door until the elderly woman came outside. "Land sakes, what in the world?" Mrs. Patterson stopped mid-sentence when she saw Dakota, then looked toward Ayanna's property. Something in the cub's frantic behavior communicated urgency even across species lines. She followed him back to find Ayanna conscious but weak, sitting in her driveway with Dakota pressed against her side. "Ayanna Blackfeather, what on earth is going on here?" Mrs. Patterson demanded as she helped her neighbor to her feet. "And why do you have a bear cub in your yard?" There was no hiding it anymore. Ayanna told Mrs. Patterson everything. Finding Dakota, the research facility, Harold's journal, her growing love for the cub who'd given her life purpose again. She expected judgment, demands to call the authorities, lectures about federal law and personal safety. Instead, Mrs. Patterson surprised her. "Honey, that little one just saved your life. Far as I'm concerned, that makes him family." She paused, studying Dakota with new respect. "My late husband always said you can judge a person's character by how they treat something smaller and more helpless than themselves. That cub's got good character, and so do you." The medical crisis forced Ayanna to finally address her deteriorating health. Dr. Martinez was blunt during her emergency room visit. "Mrs. Blackfeather, you're pushing your heart beyond its limits. The stress, the physical demands, whatever you're dealing with at home, it has to change, or you won't live to see Christmas." But when she explained about Dakota, Dr. Martinez's expression softened. As a grandfather himself, he understood the healing power of having someone to care for. "That cub needs you healthy," he said. "Start taking your medication again. Cut back on the physical demands. And for heaven's sake, let other people help you." Help came from unexpected places. Mrs. Patterson began bringing groceries and helping with Dakota's care. Dr. Windwalker reduced her fees to nearly nothing, claiming it was research into human-wildlife bonding. Even the mailman, Frank Crow Dog, started lingering during his deliveries to chat with Dakota, who seemed to enjoy the daily social visits. But the peace couldn't last. On a cold morning in early November, a government truck pulled into Ayanna's driveway. Wildlife Officer Thomas Crow Dog, Frank's cousin, stepped out in full uniform, clipboard in hand and a grim expression on his weathered face. "Mrs. Blackfeather," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I'm here about reports of illegal wildlife possession. Someone's filed a complaint." Ayanna's heart sank. Through the living room window, she could see Dakota watching the interaction, pressed against the glass with his ears forward. "Thomas, you know me. You know I wouldn't hurt anything?" "Yes, ma'am, I do know that. But the law's the law, regardless of intentions." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I'm required to give you official notice. You have 30 days to surrender the bear to proper authorities or face federal charges." 30 days, Ayanna repeated numbly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackfeather, I truly am, but someone reported this directly to the Federal Wildlife Office. My hands are tied." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Use those 30 days wisely. Sometimes situations change if the right people get involved." That evening, Ayanna sat on her porch with Dakota beside her, watching the first snow of winter dust the mountain peaks. The cub had grown in the 2 months since she'd found him, not just physically, but emotionally. The frightened, traumatized baby had become a confident young bear who trusted completely in her love and protection. 30 days, baby, she whispered, scratching behind his ears the way he loved. 30 days to figure out how to keep our family together. As if he understood, Dakota pressed closer to her side and made that soft, huffing sound that had become his way of saying, "I love you too." In the distance, a lone wolf howled its evening song, and Ayanna found herself howling back, a sound of defiance, of determination, of a woman who'd finally found something worth fighting for. The real battle was just beginning. The phone call that changed everything came at 6 in the morning, 3 days after Officer Crow Dog's visit. Ayanna was preparing Dakota's breakfast when her landline rang with the jarring persistence that meant official business. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and terrifying. "Mrs. Blackfeather, this is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 8 News in Charleston. We've received reports about a woman in the mountains caring for an injured bear cub. We'd like to do a feature story about wildlife rehabilitation. Would you be willing to speak with us?" Ayanna's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, sending ceramic shards across the kitchen floor. Dakota looked up from his food bowl, ears twitching at the sound of distress in her voice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed. "Ma'am, we have it on good authority that you've been providing care for a bear that was allegedly mistreated at a research facility. This could be a powerful story about animal welfare and the bonds between humans and wildlife." The line went dead, but Ayanna knew the damage was done. Someone had leaked the story, and once the media got hold of it, there would be no more hiding. She sank into Harold's old chair, her heart racing as Dakota abandoned his breakfast to climb into her lap, all 40 pounds of him seeking comfort the only way he knew how. By noon, the first news van appeared at the end of her driveway. Ayanna watched from behind her curtains as a young reporter practiced her introduction, gesturing toward the cabin while a cameraman adjusted his equipment. Within hours, 3 more vehicles had joined them, creating an impromptu media camp on the mountain road. "What are we going to do, baby?" Ayanna whispered to Dakota, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He'd positioned himself between her and the front door, his protective instincts fully activated despite his young age. The answer came in the form of an unexpected visitor. Dr. Marcus Kane from Mountain Research Facility arrived in a black SUV that evening, flanked by 2 men in suits who looked like they'd never set foot in the mountains before. Ayanna watched them approach her front porch, her hands trembling as she considered her options. Kane was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of confident smile she'd learned to distrust during her nursing career. "Mrs. Blackfeather, I'm Dr. Kane. We spoke on the phone several weeks ago about the bear cub you found." "I remember," Ayanna said through the screen door. "Told you I'd get a second opinion." "Yes, well, the situation has become more complicated now that the media is involved." Kane's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. "That cub is valuable research property, Mrs. Blackfeather. He's been specially trained, enhanced through months of behavioral conditioning. He can't survive in the wild anymore. He needs the specialized care only our facility can provide." "Enhanced?" The word made Ayanna's stomach turn. "You mean tortured. I've seen what you did to him." One of Kane's companions stepped forward, pulling out a folder thick with official documents. "Ma'am, we have legal custody papers signed by federal wildlife authorities. That bear belongs to us, and we're prepared to take legal action if necessary." Dakota chose that moment to appear beside Ayanna, pressing against her legs as he studied the strangers through the screen. Kane's expression changed when he saw the cub, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something darker underneath. "There he is," Kane said softly. "Subject 47. Do you see how calm he is, how trusting? That's not natural bear behavior, Mrs. Blackfeather. We've spent considerable time and resources modifying his responses, making him suitable for educational programs and wildlife demonstrations." "You mean you broke his spirit?" Ayana shot back. "Tortured him until he stopped fighting back." "We enhanced his ability to interact safely with humans. The amputation was necessary after he displayed aggressive tendencies. He was a baby." Ayana's voice cracked with emotion. "What kind of monster amputates a baby's paw for being scared?" Kane's facade finally dropped completely. "The kind who's trying to save an endangered species through scientific advancement. That cub represents years of research, Mrs. Blackfeather, millions of dollars in taxpayer funding. You're interfering with crucial conservation work." The media circus intensified over the next week. Reporters camped outside Ayana's property, shouting questions whenever she appeared. Social media exploded with hashtags like #HadBearGrandma and #SaveTakota, as someone had leaked the cub's name along with photos of him following Ayana around her garden. Donations began pouring in from strangers across the country. People outraged by the story of an elderly widow fighting to protect an abused animal. The attention brought unexpected allies. Dr. Windwalker arrived with a team of wildlife veterinarians from 3 states, offering to provide documented evidence of Takota's abuse. Mrs. Patterson organized the local community, creating a human chain around Ayana's property to keep reporters at bay. Even Officer Crow Dog found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending Ayana to his federal supervisors. "That woman saved that cub's life," he told anyone who would listen, "and that cub saved hers right back. Sometimes the law ain't on the side of what's right." But the pressure was overwhelming. Ayana's blood pressure spiked so high that Dr. Martinez threatened to hospitalize her. The constant stress was affecting Takota too. He'd stopped eating again and spent his days pressed against Ayana's side as if trying to absorb her anxiety. The turning point came when a young journalist named Maria Santos from the Washington Post arrived with information that changed everything. Unlike the local news crews interested in human interest stories, Maria had been investigating Mountain Research Facility for months. "Mrs. Blackfeather," Maria said during a private conversation in Ayana's kitchen, "Dr. Kane's facility is under federal investigation. There have been allegations of animal abuse, misuse of government funds, and violations of wildlife protection laws. Your Takota isn't the only victim." She spread photographs across Ayana's kitchen table, images that made the elderly woman gasp in horror. Bears with missing limbs, obvious signs of electrical burns, animals cowering in corners of concrete cells. These were taken by a whistleblower inside the facility. Kane's been using federal conservation grants to fund behavioral modification experiments that border on torture. "Why hasn't this been stopped?" Ayana asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because Kane has friends in high places, and his research produces publishable results. But your story has given us the public attention we needed to force action." Maria leaned forward intensely. "Mrs. Blackfeather, if you're willing to testify about Takota's condition when you found him, we can help shut down Kane's operation permanently." That night, Ayana made the hardest decision of her life. She called a press conference on her front porch, with Takota beside her and the mountains of West Virginia stretching endlessly behind them. Camera crews from major networks had joined the local reporters, and the scene looked like something from a movie rather than her quiet mountain life. "My name is Ayana Blackfeather," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 3 months ago, a mother bear brought her injured baby to my doorstep. She could have taken him anywhere in these mountains, but she chose my home. She chose to trust me with the most precious thing in her world." She paused, reaching down to stroke Takota's head as he sat calmly beside her chair. This little one had been tortured. His paw amputated, his body burned, his spirit nearly broken by people who called it science. But he survived because his mama loved him enough to risk everything to save him. The crowd of reporters was silent, hanging on every word. Ayanna could see some of them wiping away tears as she continued. Dr. Kane wants to take him back to that place, to continue what he calls research. But I've been a nurse for 40 years, and I know the difference between healing and hurting. What they did to Dakota wasn't science. It was cruelty. Her voice grew stronger. That cub didn't just save my life by giving me purpose again. He saved my soul by showing me that love can survive anything, even torture. She stood, lifting Dakota in her arms despite his weight. I won't let them take him back to that hell. If they want him, they'll have to go through me first. And I may be 65 years old, but I've got nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The crowd erupted in applause, but Ayanna barely heard it. She was looking into Dakota's eyes, seeing trust and love and the unbreakable bond they'd forged in the shadow of the mountains that had brought them together. The real war was about to begin. The federal marshals arrived at dawn on a Tuesday, their black vehicles cutting through the morning mist like harbingers of doom. Ayanna had been expecting them since her press conference 3 days earlier, but the sight of armed officers approaching her cabin still sent her heart racing. Dakota sensed the danger immediately, positioning himself between Ayanna and the front door with a low growl that seemed impossibly deep for such a young bear. "Mrs. Blackfeather," called the lead marshal, a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair, "we have a federal warrant for the seizure of one black bear cub currently in your illegal possession. Please surrender the animal peacefully." Through her kitchen window, Ayanna could see Dr. Kane standing behind the marshals, his satisfied smile visible even from a distance. Beside him waited a metal transport cage large enough for Dakota, with air holes that looked far too small for comfort. The sight of that cage made Ayanna's nursing instincts flare with protective fury. "You've got 48 hours to change your mind, Mrs. Blackfeather," Kane called out. "After that, we'll be forced to take more aggressive action." The countdown had begun, and Ayanna felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. That afternoon, while Dakota napped in Harold's old chair, she sat at her kitchen table writing what might be her final letter to Emma. Her daughter hadn't called in weeks, and Ayanna wondered if Emma even knew about the media circus surrounding her mother's fight to save a bear cub. "My dearest Emma," she wrote with shaking hands, "by the time you read this, they may have taken Dakota away from me. I know you'll think your old mama has lost her mind, choosing a bear over her own safety. But honey, sometimes love doesn't make sense to anyone except the heart's doing the loving." The sound of a car engine interrupted her thoughts. Through the window she saw a rental car pulling into her driveway, and her breath caught in her throat. Emma stepped out of the driver's seat, looking thinner than Ayanna remembered, her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But it was Emma's eyes that made Ayanna's heart stop, hollow, exhausted, carrying the weight of secrets that had nothing to do with bears or federal marshals. "Mama," Emma said when Ayanna opened the front door, and her voice cracked on that single word. Mother and daughter embraced on the front porch, and Ayanna could feel how fragile Emma had become, like a bird with hollow bones ready to break at the slightest pressure. "Emma, honey, what are you doing here? I saw the news," Emma interrupted, pulling back to look at her mother's face. "CNN, Fox, even the late-night talk shows are covering your story. The whole country's talking about the bear grandma of West Virginia." She paused, studying Ayanna with those tired eyes. "But that's not why I came." Dakota chose that moment to appear in the doorway, curious about the new voice. Emma's reaction surprised Ayanna, Instead of fear or concern, her daughter's face softened with something that looked like understanding. "So, this is the famous Dakota," Emma said quietly, kneeling down to Dakota's level. The young bear studied her for a moment, then approached cautiously. When Emma held out her hand, he sniffed it gently before allowing her to stroke his head. "He's beautiful, Mama. I can see why you love him." They spent the evening on the front porch, sharing the kind of honest conversation they hadn't had since Harold's funeral. Emma told her about the loneliness of California, the corporate job that paid well but left her feeling empty, the relationships that never seemed to stick. But there was something else, something Emma kept starting to say before changing the subject. "Mama," Emma finally said as the sun began to set behind the mountains, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you months ago." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sick, really sick." The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. "What do you mean sick?" "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Emma's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. "The doctors gave me 6 months. That was 4 months ago." Ayanna felt the world tilt sideways. All the anger she'd carried about Emma's distance, all the hurt feelings about phone calls that never came, none of it mattered now. "Oh, baby girl, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I couldn't bear to watch you go through losing someone else. You were so broken after Daddy died. And I thought—" Emma's voice broke completely. "I thought it would be easier for you if I just disappeared gradually. Let you think I was living my life in California instead of dying there." They held each other on the porch swing while Dakota sat at their feet, his presence somehow comforting even in the face of devastating news. As the stars appeared overhead, Emma explained her real reason for coming home. "When I saw you on the news, fighting so hard for that little bear, I realized something. You weren't broken after Daddy died. You were just waiting for something to love again. And watching you risk everything for Dakota made me understand that I was wrong to try to protect you from my cancer. You're stronger than I gave you credit for." That night, as Emma settled into her childhood bedroom and Dakota curled up on his bed beside Ayanna's chair, mother and daughter had to face an impossible reality. In less than 48 hours, federal marshals would return to take Dakota away. And sometime in the next few months, cancer would take Emma away too. "Mama," Emma had said before going to bed, "I support whatever you decide about Dakota. If you want to fight this thing, I'll fight beside you. And if you want to let him go to protect yourself, I'll understand that too. But don't make this decision based on what you think will protect me. I'm already dying. Let me at least live while I'm doing it." Ayanna sat in the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of the two beings she loved most in the world, sleeping safely under her roof. Outside, she could see the glow of media camp lights through the trees, and she knew Dr. Kane was somewhere out there too, waiting for his 48 hours to expire. Tomorrow would bring the fight of her life, but tonight her family was together. Sometimes, Ayanna thought, that had to be enough to build a miracle on. The federal marshals returned exactly 48 hours later, their convoy of black vehicles cutting through the mountain mist like a funeral procession. Ayanna stood on her front porch with Emma beside her and Dakota pressed against her legs, watching as Dr. Kane emerged from the lead vehicle with a satisfied smile that made her stomach turn. Behind him, 2 men in tactical gear carried tranquilizer equipment and the same metal transport cage that had haunted her nightmares. "Mrs. Blackfeather," the lead marshal called out, her voice echoing across the clearing, "your time is up. Surrender the bear now, or we'll be forced to take him by whatever means necessary." The media circus had grown overnight. News vans lined the mountain road, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sun. Reporters shouted questions from behind the police barriers, their cameras capturing every moment of what they dubbed the Bear Battle of West Virginia. Ayanna felt Emma's hand slip into hers, her daughter's grip weak but determined. "Remember what I said, Mama. Whatever you decide." But before Ayanna could respond, Dr. Kane stepped forward with documents clutched in his manicured hands. "Mrs. Blackfeather, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Subject 47 is valuable government property. He's been specially trained for educational programs, modified to interact safely with humans. You're interfering with important conservation work." "His name is Dakota," Ayanna said quietly, her voice carrying across the clearing despite its softness. "And the only thing you modified was his ability to trust." Kane's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "That bear has been conditioned through months of behavioral modification. The amputation was necessary after he displayed aggressive tendencies toward staff members. We were protecting both the animal and our researchers." "He was 3 months old." Emma stepped forward, her voice stronger than her fragile appearance suggested. "What kind of monster calls a terrified baby bear aggressive?" For the first time, Kane looked uncomfortable. His eyes shifted between mother and daughter, then landed on the cameras recording every word. "Miss, you don't understand the complexities of wildlife research. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." That's when Dakota did something that changed everything. Instead of cowering behind Ayanna as he had during previous confrontations, the young bear walked calmly down the porch steps and positioned himself directly between his family and the strangers. But he didn't growl or show any signs of aggression. Instead, he sat down in the gravel driveway and began to perform a series of behaviors that made the entire crowd fall silent. Using his remaining front paw and his powerful hind legs, Dakota methodically arranged small stones into a perfect circle. Then he placed a single pine cone in the center and gently pushed it toward Dr. Kane. The gesture was unmistakably peaceful, an offering, not a threat. Dr. Kane stared at the stone circle, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," he whispered. "We never taught him that behavior." "Because you can't teach kindness," Ayanna said, walking down the steps to kneel beside Dakota. "You can only beat it out of something or let it grow naturally. This little one chose kindness despite everything you did to him." The lead marshal looked uncertain for the first time since arriving. "Dr. Kane, you said this animal was dangerous. Modified. This doesn't look like dangerous behavior to me." Kane's composure was cracking visibly now. He's been conditioned to perform for humans. This is exactly the kind of unnatural behavior that proves he can't survive in the wild." But Maria Santos, the investigative journalist, had been recording everything from behind the media barrier. Now she stepped forward with her phone raised, playing audio that made Kane's face go white. "This is a recording from inside Mountain Research Facility," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Made by a whistleblower 3 weeks ago." Kane's voice filled the clearing, distorted by poor audio quality but unmistakably his. "Subject 47 is responding too slowly to negative conditioning. Increase the electrical stimulus and reduce food rations until compliance improves. If he continues to show maternal bonding behaviors with the other cubs, separate him completely." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Several reporters shouted questions simultaneously, but Maria wasn't finished. "Dr. Kane, would you like to explain to these federal officers why your behavioral modification involved starving baby bears and using electrical torture?" Kane's face had gone from white to red, his professional demeanor completely shattered. "That recording is taken out of context. You don't understand the complexities." "I understand torture when I hear it," Emma interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. And so does everyone else here. The lead marshal was speaking urgently into her radio, while Kane gesticulated wildly at his assistants. But the real drama was happening in the gravel driveway, where Dakota had abandoned his stone circle to approach the transport cage. Instead of showing fear, he sniffed it curiously, then did something that brought tears to Ayanna's eyes. He began methodically dismantling the cage's latch mechanism with his claws, not to escape, but to demonstrate his intelligence. Within minutes, he had the door open and was sitting calmly beside the cage, looking directly at Dr. Kane as if to say, "I could leave any time I want. I choose to stay." The federal marshals exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the dangerous, modified animal they'd been told to retrieve. This was a young bear displaying remarkable intelligence and emotional sophistication, qualities that suggested successful rehabilitation, not abuse. "Dr. Kane," the lead marshal said slowly, "I'm going to need you to provide additional documentation about this animal's status. This situation has become complicated." Kane was sweating now despite the cool mountain air. "Marshal, I have full legal authority." "You had full legal authority," Maria Santos interrupted, stepping forward with a fresh set of documents. "These are federal indictments handed down this morning charging Mountain Research Facility with animal abuse, fraud, and misuse of government funds." "Dr. Kane, you're under arrest." The clearing exploded into chaos as FBI agents emerged from unmarked vehicles, reading Kane his rights while cameras captured every moment. The transport cage sat abandoned in the driveway as Dakota wandered back to Ayanna's side, seemingly unperturbed by the drama surrounding him. Emma grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes bright with the first hope Ayanna had seen in them since her arrival. "Mama, does this mean—" "I think it means our boy is coming home," Ayanna whispered, sinking to her knees as Dakota climbed into her lap. All 60 pounds of him seeking the comfort of the only mother he'd ever really known. But even as relief flooded through her, Ayanna knew their struggles weren't over. Emma was still dying. The legal battles would continue for months. And somewhere in the mountains, a mother bear was still waiting for news of her cub. The hardest choices still lay ahead. The victory celebration lasted exactly 3 hours before reality came crashing back. Dr. Kane was in federal custody, his facility shut down pending investigation, and Dakota was legally safe for the first time since Ayanna had found him. But as the media crews packed up their equipment and the government vehicles disappeared down the mountain road, Emma collapsed on the front porch steps. "Mama," she gasped, her face gray with pain, I think I need to go to the hospital." The drive to Charleston General felt like the longest 45 minutes of Ayanna's life. Emma curled in the passenger seat, her breathing shallow and labored, while Dakota whined anxiously from the back seat. Ayanna had refused to leave him behind. After everything they'd been through together, she wasn't letting her family be separated again. Dr. Martinez met them at the emergency room entrance, his expression grim as he helped Emma into a wheelchair. "How long has she been having these episodes?" he asked Ayanna quietly. "I don't know. She just told me about the cancer 3 days ago." Ayanna's voice broke on the words. "She's been hiding it for months." The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of medical terminology, worried whispers, and the antiseptic smell of hospital corridors. Dakota sat quietly in the family waiting room, somehow understanding that this was a place for sickness and healing. Nurses who should have been concerned about a bear in their hospital instead found themselves drawn to his gentle presence, several stopping to offer him treats from their lunch bags. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged from Emma's room, his face told Ayanna everything she needed to know before he spoke a word. "The cancer has progressed faster than we expected," he said gently, guiding Ayanna to a quiet corner. "She's got weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky. The pain is getting worse and her body is shutting down." Ayanna felt the world tilt sideways. After fighting so hard to save Dakota, after winning against impossible odds, she was going to lose her daughter anyway. "Can she come home? I want to take care of her." "She'll need hospice care, pain management, round-the-clock monitoring." Dr. Martinez paused, studying Ayanna's face. "Are you sure you can handle that along with everything else?" Ayanna looked across the waiting room at Dakota, who was sitting patiently beside Harold's old jacket she'd brought for comfort. The young bear met her eyes and made that soft, huffing sound that meant, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Doctor, I've been a nurse for 40 years. I've cared for dying patients and I've cared for a traumatized bear cub. Taking care of my daughter is what I was born to do." They brought Emma home 2 days later, setting up a hospital bed in the living room where she could watch the mountains through the big picture window. Dakota immediately appointed himself as her guardian, positioning his bed beside hers and rarely leaving her side except for necessary trips outside. The transformation in their relationship was remarkable. Emma, who had been distant and formal since Harold's death, began talking to her mother with the openness of childhood. They shared memories of Emma's early years, Harold's terrible jokes, the dreams they'd had for grandchildren who might never exist. "Mama," Emma said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold, "I need to tell you something else, something I should have said years ago." Ayanna was brushing Emma's hair, a nightly ritual that had become precious to both of them. "What is it, honey?" "I have a daughter." The words came out in a rush, as if Emma had been holding them back with physical effort. "Her name is Sarah. She's 12 years old, and she lives with her father in Oregon." The hairbrush slipped from Ayanna's fingers. "A granddaughter. Emma, why didn't you?" "Because I was young and scared and ashamed." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I got pregnant in college, and when I told you and Daddy, you both looked so disappointed, so I ran away to California, had the baby, and gave custody to her father when she was 2. I thought it was better for everyone if she didn't know about us." Ayanna felt tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Emma, we weren't disappointed in you. We were worried about you. We would have helped. We would have loved her. I know that now. I've always known it, really. But by the time I realized my mistake, too much time had passed." How do you explain to a child that her grandmother exists but never tried to meet her? That night, Emma made a phone call that took more courage than fighting federal marshals had required. Ayanna listened from the kitchen as her daughter spoke to her ex-partner, explaining about the cancer, about coming home to West Virginia, about the grandmother who desperately wanted to meet her only grandchild. "Her name is Sarah Blackfeather Chen," Emma said when she hung up, "and she wants to come for a visit. Tom is driving her out next week." The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Emma's health was declining rapidly, but she seemed energized by the prospect of introducing her daughter to the mountain home where she'd grown up. Dakota sensed the excitement and spent his days helping Ayanna prepare the guest room that had been Harold's workshop, carrying small items in his mouth like a furry assistant. Sarah arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, stepping out of her father's car with the kind of cautious curiosity that reminded Ayanna painfully of Emma at the same age. She was tall for 12, with Emma's blonde hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Grandma Ayanna?" she said tentatively, and Ayanna's heart broke wide open at the word she'd never thought she'd hear. "Yes, baby girl, I'm your grandma." Ayanna knelt to hug her granddaughter, breathing in the scent of innocence and possibility that seemed to cling to all children. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw Dakota watching from the porch. "Mom said you have a pet bear, but I thought she was joking." "He's not exactly a pet," Ayanna explained, leading Sarah up the porch steps. "He's more like family." What followed was a magical week that felt stolen from time itself. Sarah took to mountain life with the same enthusiasm Emma had shown as a child, exploring the property with Dakota as her constant companion. The young bear seemed to understand that this human child was special, gently guiding her away from steep drops and sharing his favorite sunny spots for afternoon naps. Emma rallied enough to share stories of her own childhood, pointing out the tree where she'd built a fort, the creek where she'd caught minnows, the meadow where Harold had taught her to identify wildflowers. Sarah absorbed every detail, creating mental maps of a heritage she'd never known existed. But the most precious moments came in the evenings, when 3 generations sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Emma in her wheelchair, Ayanna in Harold's old rocking chair, and Sarah cross-legged on the floor with Dakota's massive head in her lap. They talked about everything and nothing, school, friends, dreams, fears, the way love could stretch across years and distance without breaking. "Grandma," Sarah said on her last night, after Mom, can I come back and visit you in Dakota sometimes?" Ayanna looked at her granddaughter, this miracle child she'd never known existed, and felt her heart expand in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Honey, you can come visit any time you want. This will always be your home, too." As Sarah's father prepared to drive her back to Oregon, the little girl hugged Dakota goodbye with tears streaming down her face. "Take care of Grandma for me, okay? And Mom, too, for as long as you can." The bear made his soft, huffing sound and gently licked her cheek, as if making a promise only they understood. Emma died 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning when the mountains were painted with autumn colors that would have taken her breath away if she'd still been breathing to see them. Emma passed peacefully on a Tuesday morning when the autumn maples blazed like stained glass windows against the mountain sky. She died as she had lived her final weeks, surrounded by love, with Dakota's gentle presence at her bedside and Ayanna's hand clasped in hers. Her last words were a whispered "thank you" that encompassed everything. Gratitude for forgiveness, for time reclaimed, for the miracle of watching her mother and daughter find each other through the love of a 3-legged bear. The funeral was small but profound, held in the Cherokee tradition on the mountain where Emma had played as a child. Sarah flew back from Oregon with her father, and together the family laid Emma to rest beside Harold under the old oak tree they'd planted for their first anniversary. Dakota sat quietly throughout the ceremony, as if he understood the solemnity of saying goodbye. In the weeks that followed, grief settled over the mountain cabin like early winter snow. Ayanna found herself talking to 2 photographs now, Harold's familiar smile and Emma's senior portrait from high school, when the future had seemed limitless and cancer was just a word in medical textbooks. The silence felt different than it had after Harold's death, deeper somehow, weighted with regrets about lost years and conversations that came too late. But Dakota wouldn't let her disappear into that silence. Every morning he nudged her out of bed with gentle persistence, leading her to the kitchen where he would sit patiently beside the coffee maker until she went through the motions of living. He brought her his favorite toys when she cried, pressed his warm bulk against her legs when she stood too long at the window, watching for visitors who would never come. The legal aftermath of Dr. Kane's arrest had made Dakota officially Ayanna's responsibility under a special wildlife sanctuary permit, but the paperwork felt irrelevant now. They were bound by something stronger than law, the unbreakable thread of mutual rescue that had saved them both from different kinds of dying. 3 months after Emma's funeral, as winter settled seriously over the mountains, Ayanna received a phone call that changed everything again. Tom Chen's voice was careful, measured, carrying the weight of a decision that would reshape all their futures. Mrs. Blackfeather, I've been thinking about what Emma said before she died, about Sarah needing to know her heritage, her mountain family. He paused, and Ayanna could hear her granddaughter's voice in the background, eager and insistent. My job is transferring me to Richmond. We'll be 3 hours away instead of 3,000 miles. Sarah wants to spend her summer vacation with you, if you'll have her. The prospect of 12-year-old energy filling the quiet cabin terrified and thrilled Ayanna in equal measure. She was 66 now, slowed by arthritis and heart medication, and caring for a growing bear was challenging enough. But the thought of Sarah's laughter echoing through rooms that had held too much sadness was irresistible. Tom, honey, she can spend every summer here if she wants. This is her mama's home, which makes it hers too. Summer arrived early that year, bringing Sarah back to the mountains with suitcases full of clothes and dreams. At 13 now, she moved with the confident grace of a teenager, but still lit up like a child when Dakota bounded across the meadow to greet her. The bear had grown considerably over the winter, now weighing nearly 200 pounds, but retaining the gentle spirit that made him safe around the girl who had become his favorite human after Ayanna. The summer routine they established felt like healing made visible. Mornings began with Sarah helping Ayanna prepare Dakota's increasingly substantial meals, the teenager chattering about school and friends while the bear supervised from his favorite spot beside the refrigerator. Afternoons were for exploration, Sarah documenting the mountain's wildlife with her camera, while Dakota served as patient model and protective guardian. But it was the evenings that held the most magic. When 3 generations gathered on the front porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains in impossible colors. Sarah would read aloud from the books she was discovering, classics her mother had loved, new stories that spoke to her own evolving worldview, while Ayanna rocked in Harold's chair and Dakota dozed at their feet. "Grandma," Sarah said one evening in late July, her voice carefully casual in the way of teenagers approaching serious topics. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. About how she waited so long to come home." Ayanna set down her knitting, giving her granddaughter the focused attention such moments deserved. "What about it, honey?" "I don't want to make the same mistake. I don't want to wait until it's almost too late to tell people I love them." Sarah's voice grew stronger, more decisive. "I want to come live with you. Not just summers, permanently. Dad says he'll consider it if it's what I really want." The proposition hung in the mountain air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Ayanna thought about her failing health, the financial challenges of raising a teenager on a fixed income, the enormous responsibility of guiding a young person through the crucial high school years. Then she looked at Sarah's hopeful face and Dakota's encouraging eyes, and the answer became obvious. "Baby girl, nothing would make me happier. This house has been too quiet for too long." The logistics took months to arrange. School transfers, custody adjustments, the construction of a proper bedroom for Sarah in what had been Harold's workshop. By October, it was official. Sarah Blackfeather Chen would finish her education in West Virginia, growing up with mountains instead of city streets, learning life lessons from a grandmother who'd never expected a second chance at motherhood. The transformation of their little family unit was remarkable. Sarah threw herself into mountain life with enthusiasm that reminded Ayanna painfully of Emma at the same age. She learned to drive Ayanna's old pickup truck on forest roads, helped with Dakota's care and training, even started a blog documenting their unconventional family that gained thousands of followers fascinated by their story. More importantly, she gave Ayanna purpose beyond mere survival. There were school events to attend, teenage dramas to navigate, college applications to consider. The cabin filled with Sarah's friends, teenagers who accepted Dakota as just another family member and treated Ayanna with the respect usually reserved for beloved grandparents. You know what I realized? Sarah said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Dakota chase fireflies in the meadow. Mom wasn't wrong to leave. She was just afraid of not being enough. But you taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up and staying, even when things get hard. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds, Ayanna reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all together. A mother bear's desperate trust had led to a wounded cub who'd healed her broken heart. That healing had given her strength to fight for what mattered, which had brought Emma home in time for forgiveness and reconciliation. Emma's courage in reaching out to Sarah had created this final miracle, a teenager who chose love over fear, mountains over city convenience, the complicated beauty of family bonds over the simpler path of staying away. On her 67th birthday, surrounded by Sarah's homemade cake and Dakota's gentle presence, Ayanna understood Harold's final journal entry in a way she never had before. The mountains had indeed sent her what she needed most. Not just a bear to save, but a purpose to reclaim, a daughter to forgive, and a granddaughter to love into adulthood. Sometimes the best gifts come in the most unexpected packages, wrapped in trust and delivered by creatures who understand that love is the only true wilderness worth exploring. For our wonderful community of listeners who understand that life's greatest chapters often begin when we think the story is ending. Have you ever discovered that what seemed like an ending was actually a beautiful new beginning? Share with us. What unexpected blessing transformed your golden years from lonely into meaningful? We'd love to hear how love found you when you needed it most. Please leave your stories in the comments below.